The risk of breaching Russian sanctions remains a top concern for European banks, corporations and wealthy individuals despite market tensions surrounding the U.S. withdrawal from the Iran deal, sanctions experts said Friday. The conflicting interests of the U.S. and the European Union, when combined with the extensive reach of the latest round of U.S. sanctions against Russia, make for a very uncertain scenario, said Justine Walker, head of sanctions for UK Finance, a financial institutions trade group. It's the worst-case scenario for banks, this US-EU separation of policies, said Ms. Walker during a briefing hosted by Dow Jones Risk. Companies and banks are scrambling to ensure licenses and exemptions from U.S. authorities are sufficient to avoid breaching sanctions imposed by the U.S. Treasury Department onto 7 Russian oligarchs, their companies and some Russian officials in early April, she said. It has been phenomenally complex. There's a lot of anxiety about what will happen, said Ms. Walker. UK Finance fielded dozens of calls and hosted several briefings to help banks navigate the shifting landscape, she said. Questions about the legal interpretation under the sanctions text of significant transaction plagued one bank that was about to make salary payments to 600 employees in an European country working for a company caught in the sanctions, she said as an example about the obstacles companies face. Other companies found it challenging to divest assets to adhere to the Russian sanctions as they struggled to find suitable buyers, said Ms. Walker. Some wealthy Russians in London are concerned about their ability to use their bank accounts, as financial institutions are closing accounts to avoid the risk of sanctions exposure, said Michael O'Kane, a senior partner at law firm Peters. Exposure to sanctions is significant, not only because of unpredictability around decision-making by the current U.S. administration, but because the extraterritorial reach of U.S. enforcement authorities, said Mr. O'Kane, who represents companies and individuals in sanctions matters. Secondary considerations. U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw the U.S. from the Iran deal puts the European Union in a tough spot, the panelists said. The bloc has nudged businesses to re-engage with Iran since the deal was implemented in January 2016. The extent and scope of the sanctions caught U.S. allies off guard, they said, and there will be much jostling in coming months, until the end of the 180-day grace period that companies have to cut ties to Iran. European companies and banks will have to carefully map their relationships to Iranian institutions to determine potential exposure to secondary sanctions, one of the most painful aspects of the U.S. sanctions, said Ms. Walker. Secondary sanctions target non-U.S. persons for activities that are non-U.S. related and that occur in non-U.S. jurisdictions but involve entities or countries under sanctions. The U.S. has implemented secondary sanctions on foreign financial institutions engaging in significant transactions with Iranian entities. Once the 180 days are up in November, the question that banks and companies will need to answer is, do you want to be doing business with Iran or do you want to do business with the U.S., he said. Write to Mara Lamos-Stein at mara.lamos-stein@wsj.com. Follow her on Twitter @LikeLimara.